Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon has arrived in theatres, and after watching the film, I think it's a brutal masterpiece. The direction, the performances, the way this story of the Osage is adapted using perspective, and the filmmaking is all on such a high level here. You really get a sense of how Scorsese has altered the focus of this story from the book to make you feel the betrayal that the Osage people felt, and the way the movie is put together cinematically is just the cherry on top for the filmmaker. So in this video, I'm going to be listing the main reasons why I think Killers of the Flower Moon is a cinematic masterpiece. This video essay will contain brief spoilers, so if you do happen to be someone who hasn't seen the film yet, then I would recommend watching this video after you've seen it. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my upcoming content for auteur-driven films, like Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into my thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon. So Killers of the Flower Moon is adapted by Martin Scorsese and Eric Roth and based on David Grann's book of the same name, showcasing the manipulation and planned murders of the Osage people with all the devastation that came with it. It centres on DiCaprio's Ernest Burkhart, a recently released war veteran, and his relationship with an Osage woman, Molly Kyle. Ernest has no skills or hunger for work, he just wants money and a wife. And with his uncle William Hale, played by Robert De Niro, sending him in the direction of Molly, things soon get quite horrible. I did a whole breakdown on the film the other day, but to keep things short, while they do fall for each other and DiCaprio's love for her is mostly true, Ernest's motives become extremely troubled and his uncle's schemes lead to much bloodshed and death for Molly's family. What comes with that is the eradication of the Osage people from a part of history and a stolen foundation for the white Americans to thrive in. It's an unprecedented story of betrayal, mistrust, and greed that once again shows Scorsese's ambitions to exploit systems of control. On top of this, there's a clear difference between Scorsese's adaptation and the source material by David Grann. The narrative structure of the book is built on the Osage murders and the birth of the FBI, with a lot of it focusing on the crime and the investigation. But like seen with many good adaptations, what's on the page doesn't mean that this should translate directly to screen. Apparently, Scorsese wasn't happy with a first draft of the script because it focused too much on the perspective from the outside of the situation, and in turn, he realised that the centre of the story should be the tragic and strange love between Ernest and Molly. In doing so, he was able to show how Ernest was actively involved in the scheme to defraud Molly and her family, and how the overseeing eyes of his uncle directed that. The way Scorsese approaches the twisted scheme to transfer the oil wealth of the Osage to the white men around them is what makes the movie its own historical beast. This all happened in history, yes, but it's how the film focuses on how crime and the egos at the centre take the innocent lives. There's no hiding who was to blame, so there's no point in making it a massive mystery, and that is exactly what Scorsese did with the perspectives we see. We see De Niro's extended planning while pretending to be a friend, we see how Ernest makes that a reality as troubled as he is, and we see how Molly and her family have to deal with much loss and a deep hatred for her people and their wealth. Throughout the extensive runtime, there's a conflict over who gets to tell this tragic story and who gets to tell us what's actually happening. And while we get glimmers from each perspective throughout the course of the movie, the version of events that make it into the obituary obituaries and the history books is not the Osage. The ending of Scorsese's film delivers on that horrible note in quite the perfect way. The unique epilogue we got shows the ending to certain characters not revealed through information or titles on screen, but rather through an episode of a J. Edgar Hoover endorsed radio drama in the 50s, recorded with performers on a theatre stage. Director Martin Scorsese cameos in this himself and describes the end of Molly's life and the tragedy that the Osage were left with. He makes the point that it's not just the land that was stolen, but the culture and their history as well. That's because, as noted in reference to Molly, her obituary made no mention of Ernest or the murders. When we then jump forward in time to an overhead shot of the Osage tribe dancing and enduring today, it's very clear what Scorsese's final message is, and that is, while the historical narrative was erased by America, the Osage continue to fight in the face of racism. The film is essentially a portrait of how man, no matter how incompetent, can still inflict a lot of damage and choose to do the wrong thing time and time again. It's an epic story told through an intimate lens, with an ending that fully delivers on its resilient message. And this story cannot be as effective as it was without some of the performances to really elevate it to another level. Leonardo DiCaprio transforms into Ernest Burkhart, but not in the traditional sense, as with the help of prosthetics, the actor plays a character we haven't seen from him before. This time, DiCaprio plays quite a dumb individual who keeps choosing to cause trouble and problems for the innocent. He keeps making horrible choices and can't seem to break that cycle. We see this struggle countless times in his reactions on screen, and then by playing into the confusion of the character, we also watch him sell the actual love he has for Molly. While it tends to be a flipping of the two, at the end of the day, DiCaprio ultimately sells the complete failure of a man, and we see how his decision to own up is one that is well too late. And even when he does so, he doesn't fully own up for his actions. I don't think it's his best performance in a Scorsese film, but I can't deny that with much of the screen time he does get, the actor sells the fragilities and faults of his character to the best of his ability. While DiCaprio was really strong, the two performances that really carry the film, however, is Lily Gladstone's Molly and Robert De Niro's William Hale. De Niro plays this sinister role in the way that all great actors play iconic villains. Subtle choices with the voice and performance allow you to see how manipulating and orchestrating his character really was. His voice is threatening yet charming, his mannerisms show the truth of his nature, like with the odd smirk and tilt of the head, and hints of twisted comedy in there personify the evil at play. And when it comes to Lily Gladstone, she also gives a subtle yet impactful performance herself, one that at this time could end up landing her many awards for Best Actress. Molly might not talk much in the film, but the way she moves and the little she says is wholly felt by the audience. It gets to the truth of how someone would react to facing racism most of their life and the relentless struggle of taking it on. To me, she's the real heart of the film, and we see how Gladstone conveys Molly's physical and mental exhaustion in particular scenes, with her character finding out about what's happening to her family and the discrimination that comes with it. And while she knows that her fate is drear, she never gives up in the face of adversity. There are a few other performances that stand out in the film, like with Tantoo Cardinal's Lizzie Q or Cara Jade Myers playing Molly's sister Anna, who, while only involved for a few scenes, sell a dangerous yet intelligent presence that brings truth to the events of the movie. The whole ensemble does a mostly excellent job of portraying their characters, and performance-wise, it's definitely going to be a big contender for the acting awards across the board. Overall, Killers of the Flower Moon isn't the film I'd want to watch again anytime soon, not because of its quality or the long runtime, but because of what takes place in this story. For instance, it's similar to how I felt after watching a film like Schindler's List for the first time too. As an individual piece of storytelling and cinema, I cannot deny that this isn't a towering achievement and a haunting American epic from the acclaimed director. The way Scorsese has brought this story story to life, exploiting the greed of man and how that affected history, is nothing short of masterful. The fact that he's still telling stories in unique and powerful ways this long into his career speaks volumes for his power as a filmmaker, and the way he works with frequent collaborators can of course aid that a whole lot too. Editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who has edited every feature film he's made since the 1980s, reinvents with the way Killers is put together. The pace is natural, allowing performances and the rhythm of storytelling to evolve and change as it needs to. There's not a sense of sequential rhythm that you find in most biopics or historical epics, and in the case of this particular story, it completely works. We see who plans the murders, who carries them out, and even those who inform others to make sure that these atrocities are completed. And rather than just building on the mystery in the traditional sense, the editing and direction of the piece gives us a somewhat guide to murder in horrifying fashion. Essentially, it shows how the planning behind the murders is what is so horrible. Martin Scorsese has always explored how America gets its power over others and the rotten core at the heart of that. And while that is true once again with Killers of the Flower Moon, his latest film also shows how the real heart of the story is not just destroyed but eradicated from history in the process. Yes, we see violence in its most ugliest and calculated form, but we truly understand how that violence destroys not just one person's life but an entire culture. So while it was hard to watch, I thought it was such a powerful piece of cinema that made me truly feel the devastation at the center of this history. But that was my review for Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. The filmmaker's latest film is a somewhat companion to another of his masterpiece pictures in Goodfellas, but this time dealing with a different kind of gangster that the US has refused to deal with. And that is ones that manipulate, organise or steal from the indigenous for profit. For me, it's one of the director's most brutal films, yet also his most self-reflective, putting a twist on the conventions of a murder mystery movie. We all know the answer to its questions straight from the outset, but watching it unfold is a whole nother matter. It's one that defines a big issue in American history, and that is, to what extent are those willing to go for greed and power? The answer is not a nice one, and what's even worse is how culture has chose to ignore the horrible truths. Again, it's a film that I wouldn't rewatch anytime soon because of its content, but I cannot deny that after watching it, how effective and powerful it was in the way the story was told. I'm giving Killers of the Flower Moon a rating of 9 out of 10. But to those who have already seen the film, what do you think of Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, and do you agree that it's one of the best films of the year? Again, it's all subjective and I appreciate a range of reactions and reviews, so let me know down below in the comment section what you thought towards it. For more videos on the work of Martin Scorsese and other auteur filmmakers, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.